This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
As followers of Jesus, in whom all things were made, we acknowledge the Darug people as the traditional custodians of the country of where this podcast is recorded. We acknowledge their continuing connection to the land and waters and thank them for protecting this land and its ecosystems since time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and we extend that respect to all First Nations peoples listening today. Hi there. Keep listening, because at the end of this episode, I have a little something for you to brighten your day. Or, if your day is already bright, to make it even better. But make sure you keep listening until the very end.
Spoke to her through a translator and said, look, we've done what we can, but we can't do anything more. We have to help you live like this with what we can. And she was obviously disappointed, but she looked at me and said, look, I mean, all my people have rejected me. You're not my skin colour or my religion or my culture, but you've loved me. You've put your hands around me. You've helped me stand when no one else would even come near me, and you've loved me, and that's enough. So I thought, well, really, that is enough to show love, and that you don't need a hospital to do that. You can do that with anyone, anywhere, and Christ is giving you that love to share his love for the downtrodden in the world to share with other people. Just sharing love speaks volumes and points people to Christ, because that love comes from Christ. And we're all made in God's image.
I'm Georgia, and welcome to Finding Hope, the podcast that reminds you of the good in the world. Each episode tells the story of someone who has found real hope in challenging times and made the world a bit of a better place along the way. Episode 69, Dr. Andrew Browning. Dr. Andrew Browning, in my opinion, truly lives out what it means to be the hands and feet of Christ. He's an Australian-trained obstetrician and gynecologist, but he has spent more than 20 years of his life in Africa, helping women affected by obstetric fistulas in childbirth. He started his African medical career in the 1990s, working under the late Dr. Catherine Hamlin, performing thousands of surgeries since that time. Dr. Browning has also established the Barbara May Foundation, which has trained local doctors and established programs to prevent fistulas from occurring. Andrew has also written a book about his life and his career called A Doctor in Africa, and it is an honour to have him with me in the room today. Andrew, welcome to Finding Hope.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Andrew, I'm almost out of breath with that introduction, but there is so much more to your story than just that. I want to start, rather than asking what obstetric fistulas are, we can go into the medical nature of it all, but I'd love to know a story about one of the women that you've helped. I know you've got thousands to choose from.
Yeah, there are thousands of stories, and each story in itself is a remarkable story of hope and resilience of these women that I treat. I mean, I've met something like 14,000 women suffering from obstetric fistula, so to single out one particular story is a challenge. But I've just back from Africa, and perhaps I'll tell you a story that's most recent. And this lady lives in East Africa, and I met her just a couple of weeks ago. Her name's Bui. She was only 16. She was married at around about 14. Very rapidly became pregnant to her husband. And where she lived in East Africa, there's no hospitals. There's no midwives, there's no doctors. So she does what pretty well every woman in her village does, and that's she tries to have her baby at home in her little mud hut without any sort of medical assistance. And childbirth in that circumstance is dangerous. One area where we work in Africa, because of that very situation, no hospitals, 1 in 12 women will die during their lifetime giving birth, just purely because there's no hospitals. So that's what Bui found herself, that situation. She went into labour in her village, fearful, because she knows and she's seen people die in labour. A full day passed and she hadn't delivered her child. Another day passed after 2 days of labour. She still hadn't delivered her child. And she was she was actually in her father's house, begging her father to send her to the hospital. But the father refused, and the hospital was about 2 days' travel away, so it was a long way away. The father refused simply because the son-in-law, their family hadn't paid enough cows as a dowry. So as a sign of displeasure, he refused to let her go to the hospital. She was in labour for another 2 days at home, and eventually he was convinced to allow her to go to the hospital. It took another 2 days for her to get there to the hospital, so 6 days had passed. She was unconscious and barely alive by the time that she got to the hospital. She was resuscitated by an Italian missionary doctor that was there that I've been training over the years. She was at a caesarean section operation to have her baby that was already dead. It took her about 3 days to regain consciousness after the operation, but when she regained consciousness, she found that she was leaking uncontrollably from her bladder. Because she'd been in labour for 6 days, the baby's head was pressed against the bones of her pelvis, so all the tissues of the bladder and birth canal had been crushed, and all those tissues died. So she delivered the stillborn child, and all those dead tissues came away, and she was left with a large fistula, or a hole, fistula just means hole, between the bladder and the birth canal. So she was leaking urine continually. She was very, very weak, of course. The husband didn't want to know her leaking urine. He wasn't there anyway, but news had got back to his village that she was leaking urine and very unwell. But the Italian missionary doctor cared for her and looked after her. She was resuscitated and survived. She was very weak. It took her about 2 months to regain strength before she was able to even walk again. I'd been training this doctor in fistula surgery, and she was due to come back to me in training just recently, a couple of weeks ago. So she brought this patient, Buey, with her. It was a day and a half travel by car to get to the hospital that I work in the capital city of this country. But there was fighting, there was war, so they had to fly. And little Buey had barely just that one time been in a car to get her to the hospital just a few days ago where she was barely conscious, never been in an aeroplane before. So she was flying to the hospital, and every little bit of turbulence, she just grabbed the mystery doctor's hand, just terrified of what was happening. But she came to the hospital, and we greeted her there and cared for her and gave her hope, and we operated on her. And she's now back at the hospital, cured. Completely cured, and absolutely delighted that she's regained strength, she's regained dignity. Next step is to reintegrate her with her family. So, I mean, that's a typical story. It's not an unusual story. As I said, I've met 14,000 women like Buey in my career, much more horrific, much more horrific than in Buey. Some ladies have been living with this condition for 40, 50 years in complete isolation. 40% of these ladies will try and take their life because they've been so isolated and they're so ashamed of the way they are. So we care for them and we love them and treat them, but more importantly, it's only God who can heal people's souls, and we tell them about Christ's love for them as well.
Yeah, incredible. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that, Andrew. I'd love to go back to the start, back to when you were a little boy, because I believe it was like this one moment in Sunday school when you realised that you wanted to be a missionary doctor.
Yeah, I was 6 at the time. So.
I mean, I didn't even know anything about anything when I was 6.
Well, I mean, I perhaps didn't, but it sounded like an exciting thing to me at that time. So here I am still living out a childhood, rather immature fantasy perhaps. But I was 6 years old, grown up in a Christian household, and the town of Bowral. We had missionaries that we supported, and I was sitting in Sunday school one day at the feet of a missionary called Dot Thompson, who just returned from Tanzania, and she was a nurse in Tanzania. She was telling us all, she was teaching us a bit of Swahili and teaching us all sorts of exciting stories about what God was doing and in Tanzania, about lions and the wildlife and the tribes and all sorts of exciting things. So a young 6-year-old mind thought, I'm going to be a missionary doctor when I grow up. So that's when I first started thinking about it, probably in a fantasy sort of fashion. But as I grew in my faith and grew as a person, I thought, that's what a wonderful way to serve God as a missionary doctor. So here I am, 48 years later, still doing the same.
And you actually come from a medical family as well.
Yeah, my father's a gynaecologist. I swore I'd never be a gynaecologist growing up, but here I am.
And your Aunt Val as well.
My aunt, we've got a very large family. She's a midwife, and she lives in Ethiopia. She's been in Ethiopia since 1974. And for the last 30 or so years, she's married into a tribal tribe called the Afar tribe. It's a nomadic tribe in the hottest inhabited place in the world, the Afar Desert, Danakil Depression of Ethiopia. That's where she calls home, and she's a midwife. She runs a huge development organisation to the Afar people, directly looking after about 1.5 to almost 2 million now Afar people in the desert. Yeah. Quite a remarkable story.
Incredible. I'd love to know how you actually, got into this work, because you were Australian trained, and then eventually you went over as a newly medical resident to Africa for the first time. What was that experience like? Stepping foot off that plane in Africa for the very first time. I imagine very different than medical school here.
Yeah, well, I actually went as a medical student. In medical school, you can get a time of, I think it's about a couple of months, where you can go anywhere in the world and do an elective in some sort of any sort of medical field. So I chose mission work and went to that hospital that missionary who inspired me when I was 6 years old came from, in Western Tanzania. So I landed there and, first went to Zimbabwe. I got there to Zimbabwe, then travelled up to Tanzania to get there. But it was extraordinary jumping off the plane, growing up in Bowral, then in Sydney, and hadn't seen terribly much of the world. I mean, I was born in England. I'd been back to England to see family a couple of times, but apart from that, never been to somewhere like Africa, and visited had friends there, and they took me to stay with some friends in the villages, staying in mud huts and things like that in Zimbabwe. It was beautiful, absolutely stunning, but hard, a really hard life. And being the only white person around was, when you're used to
a lot of looks.
Yeah, growing up in Bowral, when everyone's white, so it's, very contrasting things. But then I arrived in Western Tanzania in the hospital, and it was just at the beginning of the Rwandan genocide. So that was quite a confronting time for a young 22 or 23-year-old, whatever I was back then, sheltered life in Bowral, so forth, and seeing this horror of thousands of dead people and refugee camps full of people suffering. But it really opened my eyes to the needs of the majority of the people in the world. That's how the majority of the people of the world live, in very difficult circumstances, not how we lived or how I grew up in Bowral.
What was medically the effect of the Rwandan genocide in those weeks, months that you were there?
Yeah, well, one of the camps, so the Red Cross was very quick to get there, and 20,000 refugees came across the border. It was actually started in Burundi, then it went to Rwanda. So we were there for the very beginning of it, starting in Burundi. So 20,000 refugees came from Burundi into Tanzania, and then the genocide started in Rwanda. There was obviously injuries. There was one day when this guy just cut up completely by machetes by a group in the refugee camp came in. But going to the refugee camp, the biggest killer was dysentery, and up to 6 people a day were dying from dysentery just in that one camp. And so just putting up a drip, could save someone's life. It was.
So that's kind of what you were doing.
Yeah, just simple things.
Talk to me about the differences between, I guess there was no hospitals there, but the differences in resources between Australian hospitals and African hospitals. It's something you touch a lot on in the book, and I don't think people realise just how stark it is and how incredibly lucky that we are here with our medical system.
Yeah, no, I mean, medical system in Australia is the best in the world and the best in the history of the world. And if you want to be sick anytime in the world, be sick now in Australia because your chances are better than ever. But for, again, the majority of the world, they simply don't have access to the healthcare we have. I won't use that hospital as an illustration in Tanzania, but another one that I used to work in Ethiopia, you often do without electricity, and you can still run a hospital without electricity, but we'd also often not have water, but you can't do anything without water. You can't wash, you can't do anything, you can't function. I mean, people have been living for eons without electricity, but no one's ever lived without water. So that's your primary thing. And when we build hospitals, we don't start building until we've got a water source secured. Otherwise, you're stuck. So, I mean, the day often would start in the hospital in northern Ethiopia. We'd just have to go to a well, just start carrying buckets to the hospital full of water. But you can do a lot with very little. I mean, we can run maternity hospitals and get very good success rates, keeping women alive during pregnancy, keeping babies alive, just with the basics. And it's very cost effective. You can have look after a lady. Actually, in our hospitals, it costs on average $280 Australian to care for a woman with 4 clinic visits while she's pregnant, her blood tests, her ultrasounds, and then delivery in the hospital, 14% chance needing a caesarean, postnatal check, and immunise your baby, at 280 Australian dollars. That won't even get you an ultrasound in Australia.
Yeah.
But the results for those are the same as the results in the hospitals here. But then in the hospitals
how are
here,
they so cost effective?
the hospitals here, you can spend millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to improve the health outcomes by increments of percents.
Yeah.
So you can get a great basic health care, very basically with little resource, but to look after your 23-week premature babies, or a lady who's had a heart-lung transplant who's pregnant, that sort of thing, you need enormous resources. And having said that, though, if I was sick, I'd rather be in a hospital here.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Andrew, you returned from that trip in 1994 back to Australia, and the transition was perhaps a little more difficult than you realised.
Yeah, it is difficult coming back, and now we were 17 years living in Africa, and then I commute back, so I'm just between trips now, so I'm always backwards and forwards, and I always find coming back to Australia much more difficult than going, even now. How many years ago that was, it's still quite difficult coming back to Australia. It's the excesses of Australia, and it might sound a bit harsh, but when you go to a place that has so little, but the people are so content and happy, and then you come to a place of excess, but people aren't nearly as happy, and not so content. It's quite a difficult way to understand, and so it takes you a while to get to understand. I mean, it's all terms of reference, isn't it? If you've only known the comfortable life of Australia, and even though life in Australia is materially comfortable, there's still a lot of heartache, and probably even more than Africa, because broken families, broken relationships, broken expectations, really do a lot of damage. But in Africa, they seem to be more resilient against the brokenness of life, because community is a lot stronger, and faith is a lot stronger. So they've got more resource to stand up against the trials of life, rather, and where we're comfortable physically. I mean, we don't have to worry about anything physically. We've got police to look after us, we've got free healthcare, free education. If we make a go of things, we can. But in Africa, they don't have any of that, but they've got a lot more resilience because of strength in community and strength in faith.
Yeah, talk to me about that strength in faith. How does it?
Yeah, I mean, in Australia, because life is like that verse in Proverbs, isn't it? Give me today my daily bread. Don't give me too much, otherwise I might deny the Lord, or don't give me too little, otherwise I'll be a thief and dishonour the name of the Lord. In Australia, we have too much, and there's no need to call on God, because we've got health, we've got our provisions, our daily bread, more than our daily bread. But in Africa, when you don't have that, and there's a lot of suffering and death around you, then you call out to God, and you look for something beyond the here and now. And so faith is a lot more real in Africa, and a lot deeper perhaps in Africa, because they although they're more content with being content with little, they know that there's surely something better. And so they cry out to God. And I think we're going to see a lot more Africans in heaven than Australians, unfortunately. But it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, isn't it, than the camel to go through an eye of a needle. And I think that's very true. So it's true in my observations of life going between Africa and Australia.
Yeah. Do you feel more at home in Africa than Australia now?
I don't know. Yes, I feel they're at home in Africa. And interestingly, I just came back from Africa, and I took my boys back for their first visit in 5 years, and they'd grown up in Africa, and we only came back to Australia every 3 years or so for a couple of weeks to fundraise and see family and churches. So they didn't know Australia at all growing up, and they immediately felt at home in Africa. It was really, really fun to see, actually. And and I feel at home in Africa. But they say it takes about 8 years for you to feel more at home in your adopted culture than your culture of your passport. So we were away 17 years, all up on that trip. And moving back to Australia took a long time to adjust, but Australia is home. That's where I grew up. It's where family is, where friends are. But living this sort of lifestyle, you never really feel at home anywhere, and it's good to know that your only real home is with God in heaven.
Yeah, so a lot of comfort there.
Yes, so I mean, Yeah, they call it the third culture kid syndrome when kids are grown up in a culture that's not their own, not that of their parents. So they're different skin colour, different culture, different everything, but they feel more at home in that culture. Then they're taken out of that and put into the passport culture where they look like everyone else and they're meant to act like everyone else, but inside they're completely different, but no one can perceive that because they've grown up in a total different context and with a different culture, but they look like they belong here. And so you're never really belonging. But the blessing of that is, though, that you know that you don't belong here on earth, that your home is with Christ in heaven.
Now, in 1996, you went back to Africa. You worked with your Aunt Val in Ethiopia for a bit, and it was there that you met Dr. Catherine Hamlin for the first time, which kind of sparked the whole journey that you went on. What work did you do with her?
Yeah, so I initially went over to work with Val, though, but Val was working in the desert and Catherine was in the city of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, and my father, being a gynaecologist, had heard of Catherine Hamlin's work and her late husband, Reg Hamlin's work at the Fistula Hospital and encouraged me to visit. So I did. And when I was in the city, and Catherine kept on asking me back to the hospital to operate with her, to have lunch with her, meet her family when I was in the city. So 3 months in Ethiopia at that time, and backwards and forwards to the desert with my aunt. And whenever I was in Addis Ababa, I'd spend as much time with Catherine in the Fistula Hospital. I immediately fell in love with the patients. They're just gorgeous. They've been through so much suffering, but so strong through that suffering, actually. And to be able to help them and care for them and love them was just a joy. So when I left Ethiopia that time, I was trying to get to bed in Val's house, that she had a house in the city as well. It was full of Afar people. It was noisy. It was bustling. And anyway, Catherine gave me a call and said, look, why don't you come back to Ethiopia and work for me? And so I thought, yeah, maybe that's a good idea. So I thought about it and prayed about it and accepted that. So that's how this whole career in fistula surgery started.
Fantastic. You actually returned to Australia not long after for Bible college, is that correct? And you planned on staying, for a year and then coming back to work with Dr. Catherine, but there were some roadblocks along the way.
Yeah, so came back to Sydney Missionary Bible College and studied for a year with the intention of returning back to Africa at the end of the year and work with Catherine. But the Ethiopian Immigration Department said, no, we're not going to give you a work permit or a residence visa unless you get trained in obstetrics and gynecology. So I thought, oh, well, better do that. So I went back to Ethiopia at the end of the year just to speak with Catherine, do a bit of work, and then finalise the plans to do that. So 1998, I was lucky enough to get into a training program here in Australia, but the quickest way for me to do that was to do the British exams. So I did, although the physical training in Australia, I did my actual qualification through the college in Britain.
Right, okay.
Yes, so it was a bit complicated. It took me half the time, and I was just young and impatient. So I just wanted to do it quickly. And now I'm old and impatient, so a lot's changed. And so did that quickly, got my qualification through Britain, and immediately I got that, I moved to Ethiopia.
So you finished Bible college, you went back to Ethiopia, this time as an obstetrician to work with Dr. Catherine. It would be 17 years before you came back to Australia to live. What were your roles there? How did that change from obviously the time that you were working there the first time 5 years earlier?
Yeah, so there was a lot to learn. You don't learn fistula surgery in Australia. So I'd been, even while I was training in Australia, I was backwards and forwards to Ethiopia, doing a few months here, a few months there, learning a bit of fistula surgery at the hospital in Ethiopia. But there was still a steep learning curve. So I immersed myself in fistula surgery as soon as I landed on the ground, learning and doing as much as I could. But very rapidly I was doing a lot of outreach around Africa. So after even a couple of months, I was sent to Chad in the desert of the Sahara Desert to run a fistula camp there. The first time fistula surgery had been done in Chad. There was lots of stories from that. One lady, it was from a nomadic tribe right on the Libyan border. The first time anyone from that tribe had actually been to a hospital. So they're all kind of watching and seeing, oh, what's she going to get killed at this hospital?
What's this guy doing?
Yeah, so fortunately she was cured, which is a great blessing. But and tough country, Chad. And then I was put in charge of the training program. So we'd have surgeons come from all over Africa and Southeast Asia for training. So I was organising that and doing the training of the doctors. Yeah, first few years in Addis, that was my role.
Incredible. And did you find that you really took to teaching and training?
Yeah, I enjoyed
like
it.
your sweet
Yeah,
spot?
it's hard work.
Yeah.
Teaching surgery is hard work because you need a lot of patience. There's a lot of the surgeons need a lot of instruction because fistula surgery is quite complex surgery and the learning curve for it is quite long. And surgeons are all mixed bunch. Some have great dexterity with their hands and some are awful. They're all fingers and thumbs and they probably shouldn't be surgeons. So there's everyone in between. So yeah, it takes a lot of patience, and so still learning patience. But yeah, I do enjoy the surgery, and it's great to see surgeons I've taught in the past now being trainers themselves. So this kind of come full circle, which is great.
Yeah, and so important to continue.
Yeah, that's right.
It doesn't stop with you.
No.
Now, you created the Barbara May Foundation in 2009 to expand on Dr. Hamlin's work throughout Africa and Southeast Asia. What actually prompted you to create this organisation?
When I was in I stayed 5 years in Addis with Catherine, and then the Hamlin organisation started to build satellite hospitals around Ethiopia, and I was put in charge of the first one in a town called Bahadar. And so for 5 years, wife and kids and I were in Bahadar, it's some rural place in northern Ethiopia. I had 10 nurses with me and myself, and we were treating about 600 fistula patients a year. And it was terrific. I loved the work and being involved in a smaller town in northern Ethiopia. Lots of struggles, of course, but a lot of reward with that. But you very rapidly become a little bit despondent about fistula surgery because every patient you meet, tragic stories, much worse than Buey's story or like Buey's story, but you know that they can be prevented, and we have prevented them here in Australia and America and Europe and Southeast Asia purely by enabling all women to have access to safe obstetric care. So I initially approached Catherine and said, well, can we start building maternity hospitals to stopping this from happening? But she was very focused on just doing fistulas just in Ethiopia. So if I wanted to do that, I had to start my own organisation. So the Barbara May Foundation, we started in Australia in 2009 as the funding conduit to build and run maternity hospitals, and also to take what I'd learned with Catherine in Ethiopia out to the rest of Africa to start building fistula hospitals and developing fistula services around Africa as well. There was lots already happening because we've been training people from around Africa all that time. There's 10 years.
Go back to their
communities. Then I'd go out to Uganda or Chad or Sierra Leone or wherever and train and help establish hospitals during that time, but much more needed to be done. So we started the Barbara May Foundation to do that in 2009, and actually 2011 I left Ethiopia with my wife and kids to move to Tanzania to base ourselves there and start new fistula service in Tanzania, develop that and use that as a base for developing outside of Ethiopia.
Incredible. How do you actually choose where to build a hospital? You obviously said that you need a water source, number one.
Yeah.
But how do you make that decision? Because the need is just so great.
It's all opportunistic. And Africa is very relationship-based, and so is here, really. And it's all on trust. So it's all been opportunistic, really. So our first maternity hospital we built was with my aunt's organisation in the desert. There was no safe health service there at all for 2 million people. So we built a hospital there. So relationship with my aunt and her organisation. The next one was in Bahadar, the town where I was living. And my old colleague left the Hamlin organisation as well to build a maternity hospital in Bahadar because the government asked us to, because at that time Bahadar was the referral point for 9 million people that had one maternity hospital with 20 beds. Oh. So not much.
The math ain't mathin'.
Yes. So they gave us a health centre in the middle of Bahadar, the government did, to develop into a maternity hospital. So that was our second one. And we deliver 2,800 women there a year. And since 2011, and not a single maternal death or fistula coming out of that hospital. So we're very grateful. So moved to Tanzania because had a relationship with the medical director of this hospital. And Stephanie is actually born in Australia but grew up in Tanzania, so it was an easy country to choose from. South Sudan, again, relationships with where we've built a hospital with the Lutheran Church, relationships there. We've been asked to build in northern Uganda with another relationship that we have. central Tanzania, another. So there's need everywhere, and we've got so many opportunities. Like a colleague, an old student of mine, is in eastern DRC, place called Batambo, desperately wants to build a maternity and fistula hospital there because there's nothing. And so that's another opportunity. We haven't taken that because we don't have the funds, but if the funds came, maybe we would. So it's more opportunistic rather than but built on trust around relationships.
So important.
Yep.
Andrew, what are some of the, I know there's probably been so many challenges in this work, but what are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced in your career?
Where do I start? The blessing of those challenges is you draw on Christ. Because a lot of these challenges are insurmountable, but prayer and the blessings that God has poured out. I mean, there's lots of unanswered prayers, that's for sure, but there's been lots of answered prayers as well. For example, wanted to build a new hospital in Tanzania, but there was no money, no land, nothing. But we prayed, and after about a month of praying, I got a phone call from a lady who said, "Look, I'd like to have lunch with you," and I thought, well, I'll just ask my wife if I can go have lunch. So I did, and Stephanie said, "Fine, off you go." And at the end of the lunch, she turned out she represented the world's wealthiest family foundation. And at the end of the lunch, she said, "Look, I'd like to give you money to build a hospital." So I thought, well, hallelujah, praise the Lord. Yep. So, but then she said, on the provision that you provide abortion services. And I said, well, we're Christians. We'd rather preserve life rather than terminate a pregnancy. We'd rather support the mother through this and look after the mother as well. Plus, it's illegal in Tanzania. If we were to do that, I'd be kicked out of the country, and probably my colleagues would be fined or put in jail. So she said, okay, deal's off. But later that day, I got a phone call from a contact of a man who said, "Look, I've got some land. I want to give it to you to build a hospital." I said, "Oh, great. We'll accept the land. Don't have any money to build the hospital anymore, but we'll accept the land." So we did. We accepted the land, and about 2 weeks after accepting the land, the same lady rang up and said, "Look, I've rethought at your position around abortions. Still like to give you money to build a hospital, and you don't have to provide an abortion service." So God answered that prayer very rapidly, really, and it's been a great blessing. And I was there just 2 weeks ago. And it's a delight. Oh, it's not without its troubles, of course. We've always got staff problems and issues of funding, issues of water, issues of electricity. All those issues don't go away. There's still struggles every day. But the love that is shown to the patients by the staff and the care that's shown to the patients, some of the lives have been saved, both physically and spiritually in that hospital, and that's our aim.
Yeah, it's incredible. How you said obviously you tell people about Christ, and it's a holistic care. How do you go about that?
Medicine showing love is, well, there's lots of things I could say about that, but first, I'll tell you a story about a patient that taught me a very valuable lesson very early in my career in Ethiopia, actually. She's from the Somalia region of Ethiopia. And she came and been rejected by her community, by her family. She came, but she had a fistula that was irreparable. It was just, the injuries were so severe, you couldn't repair it. I tried, I did my best, but as expected, she wasn't cured. And so I took her, spoke to her through a translator, and said, "Look, we've done what we can, but we can't do anything more. We have to help you live like this with what we can." And she was obviously disappointed, but she looked at me and said, "Look, I mean, all my people have rejected me. You're not my skin color or my religion or my culture, but you've loved me. You've put your hands around me. You've helped me stand when no one else would even come near me, and you've loved me, and that's enough." So I thought, well, really, that is enough to show love, and that you don't need a hospital to do that. You can do that with anyone, anywhere, and Christ has given you that love to share his love for the downtrodden in the world, to share with other people. Just sharing love speaks volumes and points people to Christ, because that love comes from Christ. And we're all made in God's image. That little girl from the Somali region that's got a broken body, she's made in God's image, and God loves her. And to show her that there is real love, to help her as best we can, opens avenues to tell her that and point her to Christ as the inspiration of that love. And so to share that, we've not in Ethiopia so much because there's all sorts of difficulties there with this program, but we've got in Tanzania, we've got mega voices. They're little solar powered devices with the gospel on them in their own languages, because we've got different languages and we can give them to people. We've also got chaplains in our hospital that will pray with our patients, and I could tell you so many stories. I mean, I'll tell you one story. We gave in Tanzania, gave this mega voice to one lady, fistula patient. She listened to it every night with joy, and she went to our chaplain and said, "Look, it says on here I must repent and be baptised. So I've repented, I've given my life to Jesus, now baptise me." And the chaplain said, "Look, we're a hospital. You have to go to church." To this good Anglican chaplain we have. Said, "You must go to a hospital, to church to be baptised." Anyway, she wouldn't have that. So she got a tub, filled it up with water, and said, "Look, I've got the water." She came with a tub to the chaplain. "I've got the water, baptise me now." So she
so keen.
had to be baptised there and then.
It's very, very cool. Very cool. I love that. Andrew, how have you able to remain so deep and reliant on God?
You have to. Otherwise you can't keep going in these circumstances without that. I mean, we've been sick, been in danger, all sorts of difficult circumstances. I was in Ethiopia not so long ago, and there was fighting in the streets, gunshots, grenades, a battle outside of town, 6 truckloads of dead bodies coming into town. If you have to draw on faith in God, otherwise you just won't sustain. And just day-to-day life is tough, away from family, especially when we had a young baby up in northern Ethiopia without water in our house for 6 months, or had water but rarely, and often without electricity. So we're all sick regularly, with no family support or any other support. You couldn't even buy nappies in the street or that sort of thing, so you had to drive 10 hours even to do your shopping for basic things. Life can be tough, but the only thing that will keep you there is the love that God's given you for the people that you serve.
In 2018, you came back to Australia with your family for good, or to live. What prompted that decision?
Many things. First, Stephanie had 35 years of her life in Africa, my wife, as a missionary kid then with me. She missed a lot of things out with her family. And
so they were all still in Australia?
They were all around the world at that stage, but just having grown up in Africa, one was in Swaziland, one was in Lebanon, the other one was in Dubai, but they all started to come back to Australia. But more importantly, her niece was diagnosed with brain cancer and was dying, and she really wanted to be around. Plus, we're at a crossroads of our children's education. My wife had built a school in Ethiopia and Tanzania to send our kids to, primary schools. Our eldest was heading into high school, and so it was either to send him away to boarding school or move back to Australia, or other options as well. But combined with a lot of things, we decided that then was a good time to move back to Australia and develop the Barbara May Foundation in Australia, from Australia, and then travel. I'd commute back to Africa and do the teaching and operating and monitor the hospitals.
Yeah, which you're able to do a lot of that remotely, right?
You can do now, yeah. I wouldn't have been able to do that 20 years ago. I mean, when I first went to Africa in 93, that was well before mobile phones and internet and all that sort of thing. And there was even no phones where I was. So it took a 3 weeks at the quickest to send a letter and about 3 weeks to receive a letter back. So the quickest way you communicate was over 6 weeks. So, but now people get it cranky if I haven't replied within half an hour.
So, instant gratification.
Yes.
Andrew, I want to dig in a little bit deeper to your own resilience, and I know so much of that is based around your faith. But you've seen so much, death and dying and suffering, and that has to affect a person. How do you kind of just keep going, knowing that there is just so much need out there, and you're doing so much, but there is just this insurmountable need that's just like a mountain, just keeps getting steeper and steeper.
Yeah, but you only look at what's in front of you, don't you? And each patient that comes to us in the hospitals, we care for as best we can. And sometimes, it is. I mean, just my last trip, we had 48 fistulas operations we did in a week in Tanzania, then went to South Sudan, another 44. I was absolutely shattered. I could do that when I was younger, but now in my mid-50s, you don't recover so well, and it does take its toll. But you you have to pray before every operation you do, and with the patient, of course, that you just have God's love and compassion, and you won't rush through it. You'll treat them as they are made in the image of God. They're God's children, and yeah, you have to love them. And it's not a have, you do love them because you can see something of God in them because they are made in his image. And so, you have to draw your strength on God because you can't get it anywhere else. And maybe unkindly, I often put people that work in situations like this into three categories. First, there's the ones that work with the big, NGOs, the big things like UN and whatever, and they have very, very privileged lifestyle, get enormous salaries, fly around. The only time I meet them is if I ever upgraded into business class in the plane. That's the only time I see UN people. And they travel around and have very privileged lifestyles, but perhaps a little bit out of touch with what's actually going on the ground. And then there's people that come over, and this is a generalisation, there's all sorts of exceptions to the rules, but people come over just altruistically, want to do good. Generally, they last a couple of years, and then they get burnt out unless they've got a faith. And so then you got your missionaries who are there for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, working in really tough circumstances, not being paid, just pure love that comes from Christ to serve and to help these people. And I can give you stories of dozens of people I've worked with around Africa like that. I mean, I did 17 years there, nothing. They've been there 50, 60 years and serving and with nothing, but just really being part of the people, learning the language, loving them, being with them, and making a difference.
Such incredible work you're doing. Well, A Doctor in Africa, you can get it now wherever you get your books. BarbaraMayFoundation.com to go and support the incredible work of Dr. Browning and everything that they're doing over there. Thank you so much for being on Finding Hope, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks very much, Georgia.
Thank you so much to Dr. Andrew Browning for sharing his story today. A Doctor in Africa is available wherever you get your books. And to support Andrew's work, visit BarbaraMayFoundation.com. And that information is in the show notes. I'm Georgia, and thank you for listening to this episode of Finding Hope. To help this podcast reach more people, you can subscribe and leave a review on your favourite podcast app and share it with a friend who may need a little extra hope right now. I'll leave you with this verse. And if you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. Isaiah 58, verse 10. Catch you next time. Thank you for sticking with me until the very end of this episode. And to thank you, I'm giving you the chance to win a copy of Dr. Andrew Browning's memoir, A Doctor in Africa. If you liked this episode and you want to learn more about Andrew's work, this book is perfect. It goes into so much more detail than we were able to in the podcast. So for your chance to win a copy, simply head to hope1032.com.au/win. That is hope1032.com.au/win. And that information is in the show notes. Giveaway closes Monday, the 29th of April, 2024.